This is the CUNYCast, smart voices, good stories, and thought-provoking conversation from the City University of New York. I'm Rick Firstman.
When the evacuation flights left, then I realized that I needed to focus on them and get them out.
This summer, when the U.S. started withdrawing from Afghanistan and the Taliban were quickly seizing control, Zohra Saed's thoughts turned to the fate of one family. Zohra was born in Afghanistan, came to New York, earned 3 CUNY degrees, and now she's a poet and editor and a professor at Macaulay Honors College. 3 years ago, she began working with a writer in northern Afghanistan to translate the folk poems he'd been collecting and publish them in a book. But the Taliban's return to power had her worried about him, as well as his sister and father and the rest of their family. In various ways, they'd been active in the modernization of Afghanistan that now made them targets of the Taliban. They had to get out. From her apartment in Brooklyn, Professor Saed set out to help the family, 12 people in all, including children. She mobilized her social network of literary peers and friends in New York's community of Central Asian immigrants. Then she enlisted one of her former students, Mayha Ghouri, a CUNY Law graduate who's an immigration attorney, to file applications for visas under an emergency process that would allow the family to come to the United States. She's raised thousands of dollars for their application fees and travel expenses as the family remains in hiding and on the run in Afghanistan. I'm pleased to have both Zohra Saed and Mayha Ghouri here on the CUNYcast to talk about their quest. Welcome to you both.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So Zohra, I'd like to start with you and your own history, which is part of this story. Tell me about your family and your own journey to the United States.
Well, we came, I was born in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, and we were the only Uzbek family in that area, so we were well known. We were a generations of dentists in the area. So my dad had hoped I'd be a dentist, but I didn't become a dentist. But my dad was very concerned about having a better education for me and my brother. So we went to Saudi Arabia and then to Brooklyn from there. So we grew up in this diasporic Turkic community right in Sheepshead Bay and the other areas, I guess Kings Highway, Midwood. So it's stretched all along, yeah.
And you went to Brooklyn College for both your bachelor's and MFA, and then to the Graduate Center for your PhD in literature?
Literature, yes,
Yep.
American literature.
And so the roots of the story we're going to be talking about go back, I guess, 20 years to 2001, which is the year the U.S. began its war on terror in Afghanistan after 9/11 and drove the Taliban out of power. And it was that same year, ironically, that you and a fellow Brooklyn College Master's MFA student started a micropress called Upset Press. So tell me about that and how it led you to know this writer and his family. And I'll say here for our listeners that for the safety of the family, you're going to use pseudonyms, Ahmed for the writer and Sarah for his sister.
So in the Brooklyn College MFA program, I met my best friend, Robert Boris, and we were both running zines at the time. He was working on Sunset Park, Artists and Writers newsletter, and I was doing Ripe Guava. So we decided that we wanted to start a press, and we were representing a part of Brooklyn that we felt was underrepresented. And so Upset Press became mostly a press that published Brooklyn writers. And many of the books that we've published, about 11 books and counting, have focused on marginalized communities, marginalized voices, the kind of work that would, as the name of our press, upset the status quo was our rebellious start, yeah.
So 3 years ago, you are connected with Ahmed. And so how did that come to be?
So because my work is on Langston Hughes in Central Asia, I was going to a lot of conferences on sort of Turkic translation work and Central Asian literature as a way for me to learn how to translate better the poems that's in the Hughes archives. And there I met Ahmed's brother, who is also a Turkic scholar, and he had told me that his brother had been collecting Turkic lyrical poetry and that are usually sung and performed from the northern part of Afghanistan in the Uzbek language, which is quite rare to have it. And I was really excited about having my press publish something that was very much my experience, right?
And this is your background in terms of language and culture?
Yes. And even though recently it was recognized as the third language of Afghanistan, it's still not a literature that's sort of supported as much nationally. So for me, it was important to see something written in the Persian script Uzbek that is particular to the northern part of Afghanistan. So for me, it was very important since, my family came as refugees to Afghanistan ancestrally. My great-grandparents, my grandparents came as children from Soviet Uzbekistan. But we settled in areas that already had an indigenous Turkic community, like Uzbeks and Turkmens and Uyghurs that were already there in Afghanistan. So for me, it was definitely a sense of finding belonging in literature and bringing that together with the press and translating it eventually. Although we didn't get to the translation part, he was still in the collecting part.
When did you start worrying about him in terms of what was going on?
So I started worrying about the family the moment I heard that the Taliban were taking over the north, because the first cities that fell were northern cities, Kunduz, Shibirgan, and these areas. For me, that was a warning sign, and I had reached out to sort of check in, see if anyone needed anything. And then Sarah, I was most concerned about Sarah because even as far back as May 2021, the Taliban had attacked a girls' high school in Mazar, and she's in the provinces, so I was even more worried about her. And we had tried to get her on an evacuation flight out of Afghanistan, and I think there's more news coming out about that whole experience that, sort of started around August 16, and sort of the deadline was August 31st. And because she was the one in most danger. Because she's a female, she's a widow. She's a widower, and she's head of the family, and she was training women in the provinces to become teachers. So when the Taliban came, those were the places and the women were the ones who were facing the most danger. But then Ahmed also was in danger because he had been running sports programs in the rural areas as well, and he had been asked for a list of the students' names, and that would reveal female students. So he burnt all those papers, left his house and came to Mazar Sharif, the main city in the north. And he had been in hiding there. That's when it became dangerous for him as a former government worker. He worked with the governor there. He had protected these teen girls, but now his own teen daughters were in danger as well. So they went into hiding. And Sarah was in Kabul trying to get on several evacuation flights that listed her, but she couldn't get through the airport checkpoints. And again, I think this is in the news a lot, but it was very difficult. Gates, if you didn't have like pure force and will, because it was so dangerous between the Taliban, the checkpoints, and then the chaos that was at the airport gates. Most of the time it was like people who knew people at the gates that could get through.
And she got there to the gate.
She got to the gate.
And she could have possibly gotten on a flight.
Yeah.
And then that terrible bombing came.
She was at Abbey Gate, which is where the Kabul airport bombing had happened. And she had left because they were treating her very badly. And the group of writers she was with, she's also a poet. So they had left. And 10 minutes after they left, the bomb went off. So she had After that, she went back to Mazar because it was safer in Mazar than it was in Kabul at the time.
And also their father had been involved with anti-Taliban activity, so he was in danger.
Absolutely. The North, so what you find with a lot of Uzbek families is they're traditionally and against the Taliban. There's even the theologians are anti-Taliban, which is the father was a very well-known artist, and then he transitioned into, he studied theology, and so he's a theologian in Mazar. And he was preaching against the Taliban for decades, and so he is very much in danger, even though he's an elder. So the whole family has been very proactive in building gender equity, in building education system that's fair for all, and tying it in with the literary tradition of the North. So Sarah actually has, her thesis is on northern poets from Balkh. The area is called Balkh. And that is from, it's not just a modern history, it's a pre-modern history of poets, women, men. So she and the entire family are literary, and they pull that into their activism and their kind of insistence on gender equity being ancestral, not new, not foreign.
How did you first get involved in actively trying to get them out? And how were you in contact with them?
I was through my friend who's the scholar. And at the time, during the 3 weeks we had for evacuations, we were all helping activists, well-known activists, educators, or educational activists, human rights workers at the time. So they were involved in that list. Later, when the evacuation flights left, then I realized that I needed to focus on them and get them out. One, because of that commitment to the poetry work we were doing. For me, I don't have family in Afghanistan, so they became, for me, a literary family that connected me to them, and I felt responsible. And I didn't want to turn my back and say, well, the evacuations didn't work out, so that's it. But I really think there is a way, and it's all through this community I've built that I'm finding more ways to help them, because it's very important not to abandon those who worked so hard to bring change, especially to the rural areas.
So now at this point, this is where you come into the story, right?
Yeah.
I know you were in Zohra's class when you were a student at Hunter College,
Yes.
10 years ago. You went on to graduate from CUNY Law School, and now you're an immigration attorney with an organization in Westchester called Neighbors Link. So how did you get involved in this?
So I took Professor Saed's class, it's 9 or 10 years ago now. And I still call her Professor Saed because I think it's so weird to call her by her first name. It's like, even though we're not very apart in age, it feels so disrespectful to call her anything else. And it was Arab American literature. It was one of those classes that I think it's hard to pinpoint the lessons and put it into words, but it helps change the way you think. It really highlighted how important it was to be able to tell your own story. And my job is essentially telling somebody else's story to a judge and translating that. So even now, I'm so careful about making sure that I capture my clients' voices when they're being represented. And I'm very, very careful to use even like the language that they use and run everything by them. I think that was one of the lessons that I really learned from this class.
And so you work for, as I said, Neighbors Link. What is that organization?
So we're a nonprofit. We're based in Westchester, New York. We cover from essentially just south of Albany to Westchester. The mission is to strengthen the community through the healthy integration of immigrants. So we have all different kinds of programs, everything from ESL, we have a worker center, and we have free legal services. So all of the services that we do provide, they're to low-income people who otherwise wouldn't qualify for legal services or wouldn't be able to pay for them, and we take on their cases for free.
So you are very much a CUNY Law graduate working in public service.
Absolutely.
How does this happen? How did you get involved? Connected, you're connected with Zohra, Professor Saed, all these years, and how did this come together?
We were friends on Facebook. I feel like I friended you after I graduated the class because I feel like there might have been an ethical thing that teachers are very aware of. So I friended her after I graduated the class or finished the class. It might have been after I graduated. But she was posting, and she's active on Facebook, just about what was going on. And I was working on some Afghan evacuation cases around the same time. You know, the world was watching what was happening. And I was working on another case, and I reached out to her asking her for if she knew anyone that could help me translate some legal documents. A lot of the translation agencies either didn't have people that could speak Pashto or Dari, or they were overwhelmed. And we were trying to look for something with a fast turnaround. And so she was telling me about the people that she was working with. And it just, I didn't want, I think you asked me if I knew someone who could take the case because there were so many people that were willing to take these cases. And I just felt like I'm going to ask to see if I can take it. And I already, like I had, Neighbors Link is very open to meeting whatever need arises within the immigrant community. So I was pretty sure that I would be able to take it. But when I asked my supervisors, they said you can do it as long as it's something you can handle. You can keep up with your other cases. So, with their help, I definitely didn't do this alone. We were able to take on this family of, how many was it? 12? 12 people.
And so tell me about the process, which is called humanitarian parole, which seems like an odd term to me, the parole part, but because it's suggesting that they, did something wrong. But what was involved? What is that program? How common is it?
It's a pretty uncommon program. I think it's not something that's used very often. People use it for like medical emergencies, but when we found out that the U.S. was going to evacuate from Afghanistan, there were emergency calls upon emergency calls within the legal community across the country of people trying to figure out what is the fastest way to get people into the U.S. And so I was on a call with, I think it was over 600 lawyers early on, just with people looking for information on how to help. And the legal experts, the people that have been practicing for a very long time, all kind of came together and decided that humanitarian parole seems like it would be the best option. And it requires a beneficiary and a sponsor. The sponsor is usually a U.S. citizen who can show that they can financially provide for the beneficiaries in Afghanistan.
So you filed the applications. You had to pull together a lot of documents. Yeah. And you needed to be working with the family, I guess.
Yeah.
And how did you? That seems logistically pretty challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where Professor Saed really came in. She was the one that did all the collection of the documents. It was and provided the translations as well. And a lot of this was happening through WhatsApp. Even with my other clients, it's a very interesting way to communicate now. People are we need passport photos, so people are taking selfies of themselves and then we're printing them out here. But it was really just Professor Saed and Ahmed's brother who helped us get a lot of the necessary information here.
And you put the applications together and submitted them in October. And how long do you think it will take before there's an answer? And also, what are their chances? How many other applications are there?
So last I heard, and this was actually a couple of weeks ago, the estimate was around the higher end was 80,000 applications. But it's really hard to know what the actual number is. And as far as, timeline and chances, those are questions that are honestly better answered by USCIS because there's little to no guidance on where they stand. So right now, humanitarian parole is just permission to enter the U.S. So it is something that you would have to go. First of all, you have to go to an American embassy or consulate and pick up the humanitarian parole, which would require right now, because there are no American embassies or consulates open in Afghanistan, they have to go to a third country and pick this.
So they would have to, if they're approved, they have to then get to one or not. What countries would be?
Pakistan is overwhelmed at the moment, but I think it's where a lot of people are going. A lot of people are also going to Qatar, but again, also very, very overwhelmed. Essentially wherever they can. I think a lot of countries have also closed their borders to Afghans and made it very, very difficult to even just go to get this piece of paper. And then once you get this piece of paper, then you come to the U.S., but you aren't admitted immediately. You have to stay at these, it's immigration detention, basically, these facilities where you then go through a very, very thorough background check. And then eventually you are released and you can begin your paperwork for asylum, which is the route that most people are doing. But at the moment it is just even getting from one place to the next is really, really difficult and also requires a lot of money, and there have been incredible fundraising efforts. Professor Saed is part of, is one of many, many people that are giving and raising awareness and collecting money for these things.
What's the family's current status? What's their life like right now in this kind of period of waiting and hoping?
Well, they're in hiding now. The children are with the grandparents because the elders are safer. The situation is very frightening. There have been a lot of Taliban attacks against former government workers. So there's that constant fear.
Do you know if they've witnessed anything, any attacks, or have they come close to being found and attacked?
The fear right now that's very real is that they will be unhoused, so that the Taliban has been taking over houses and removing and displacing entire families. That's one major fear. The other fear is that they're college age. Two of the sons are college age, and one was detained by the Taliban, and there had to be bribes arranged to get them out, and it's the grandmother who had to go and negotiate. I mean, it's very hard on the elders right now. So both Ahmed and Sarah are in hiding, and it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation. There was the water was tainted, so there was cholera in the area, and it affected them, and now they're better. So these are things that are very real. There's the looming economic crisis and complete meltdown. No one has been working. There's lack of management of a country, so things are falling apart right now. So it's very urgent, and since the targets have been Uzbek and Hazara houses to take over, they're in a lot of danger right now.
There's been a lot of talk, a lot of uncertainty about life under the Taliban now compared to when they were in power in the 90s, and this idea that they're somehow trying to portray themselves as kinder, gentler Taliban. What's your sense about what's really been going on since they took control in terms of, how they've been operating, how at risk people are?
It's very hard for me to think about anything besides how it's affecting this particular family, so I can talk about it most real in this way. Of course, the problem with the Taliban is that and they're quite dangerous frankly, and there isn't the experience with governance, and there's a lot of personal vendettas happening under the Taliban. That's the most dangerous internally for internal Afghans. That the lack of access to funds means that regular everyday people will suffer. It won't be the Taliban that suffers. It'll be everyday people who see the price of bread rising, and there's minority families who will be targeted. There may be people who get away with and survive and live under the Taliban, but then there are particular minorities that will never be able to live that in peace under the Taliban. So in this family, the Sarah is a girls' high school principal. That means the school has been shut down, and there's no way she's going to be able to, as a widower, be head of household and provide for her family. With Ahmed, with his history in government and work in, cultural and athletic programming, he's not going to be able to meld and mesh again in any way. There's just no way. There are certain ways that some people will survive, but for them, it's very hard. That's why I'm so worried about them.
Right. And I guess then the case in those stacks of papers, the case you have to make is to make that real, like what they're, how in jeopardy they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also this added layer of fear of the Taliban kind of finding out any relationship that they have to people in the U.S. Or U.S. allies. So it was very common for a lot of people to burn documents, anything with English on them. So, this document collection, even at a very, very basic level, has been difficult for a lot of people. And I'm sure we could have provided, more robust records, but that would also, of being a principal, but that would require going to a school and getting those records, and that is such a scary, dangerous thing. And you have to also be careful about whose name is on it. You're putting other people at risk, so it's this balancing act of what you can safely provide, and having to provide enough.
Have you had any direct contact with them, or it's all through the UK, your contact?
It's not direct, but the information I gather, of course, the early conversations on email, those are as direct, but for the most part, it's been through the brother who's been, carrying the load of the entire family, and it's hard work to be one person carrying an entire family.
Yeah. So I wonder what do you envision for the family? Let's say they're approved for the visas to come here, and they get through this long process. Are you making some plans for them? What do you think it'll be like for them?
If the humanitarian parole does get approved, which is a challenge in itself, one of the things we're doing is I've been fortunate. CUNY has been very supportive, and I've found other supportive people who want to find creative ways of getting the college-age kids here on a student visa, if that's possible. Again, getting transcripts, recommendations, those things are just not possible with the kids. But we have to figure out how to do it. And there are programs where institutions are opening up their doors and offering visiting scholar positions, not only to artists and writers and academics, but also to civil servants who had experience building things. So these kinds of institutional support, I think, mean a lot right now, especially with the humanitarian parole being overwhelmed. There's 6, from what I last heard, 6 people processing humanitarian parole at the offices from the last article that we've read, which made us all panic. But once the humanitarian parole is provided, the next step is really getting resettlement and getting places for them. I'm really lucky. I mean, I am not alone. It's a community of Afghan Americans in the diaspora. The ones I work with are artists and writers and filmmakers. So everyone has been active. I mean, I'm definitely not the only one. I'm lucky because I found Mayha, and she's been heroic in raising funds for the Pearl fees, the HP fees, which were close to $7,000. I could not have raised that much. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I got lucky because of Mayha and Neighbors Link. That helped us a lot. One, formulate our story, get our documents in one place, and even preserve the documents. So in case something happens, we have now PDFs and JPEG files of the documents itself.
I've also never seen such a zealous advocate as Professor Said. She's got like so many theories, like if this doesn't work out, then we do this and this and this. And it's just, she has been, the whole time we have been, working on this case, she's had plan A, B, C, and D in the works. So it's also, very incredible to see.
Yeah, you've really thrown yourself into this. It is your mission. You have a GoFundMe active?
Yes, we have a GoFundMe for the resettlement. So thinking about rent for a family, and we have chuffed for the evacuation itself, which would be visa fees, which have all gone up. So a visa that could have cost $100 or maybe even $10 is now $500 to $1,000.
And where can people find the GoFundMe?
Oh, the GoFundMe is on, I think we put it on our Upset Press website.
We'll put it on the episode page.
Thank you. I don't remember, but it's like Journey to Safety was this. I had such cheesy titles for it, but I didn't know what to think of when you're like looking at the GoFundMe. So a resettlement section funding, and then an actual evacuation, because GoFundMe does not, their bylaws don't allow for like money to be sent outside of the U.S. So, or the country that started the fundraiser. But Chuffed, an Australian company, is open to creating fundraisers for the evacuation itself. So. That's why we have two.
There are a lot of obstacles and a lot of creative solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot ahead, and I'm looking forward to hearing good news before not too long. I'm sure you are as well, and we'll talk to you again, and let's hope that we can have you back in talking about the success and how they're doing, and we'll meet the family.
They're so impressive. That would be an amazing episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, they are the real treasures. They're the ones who have worked and committed their entire lives to building an educational system and collecting literature and writing about the literature of Balkh and the North. It's very important, valuable material when it's not studied enough.
Well, thanks an awful lot for coming in and telling this amazing story, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just thank you. I don't know how else to say it. Thank you.